Before we begin, here is what this episode covers. 53 documented corporate entities connected to Jeffrey Epstein. Not 53 businesses, 53 legal structures, LLCs, corporations, trusts, foundations, spread across 5 jurisdictions. 4 individuals appear as officers across the entire network: Epstein, his attorney Darren Indyke, his accountant Richard Kahn, and his pilot Larry Visoski. The crown jewel is Southern Trust Company, holding nearly $400 million by 2017 under a 90% U.S. Virgin Islands tax exemption. The transactional arm is Southern Financial, $606.9 million in, $194.7 million out. The distribution mechanism is the Butterfly Trust, over 120 wire transfers, $2.65 million to beneficiaries including women with Eastern European surnames. 2 physical hubs anchor the network, 1 floor of 1 building in Manhattan and 1 address in St. Thomas. After Epstein's death, $13 million was allegedly concealed and transferred to entities naming the attorneys and their spouses as beneficiaries. 53 shells, 4 officers, 1 architecture. This slide sets the ethical and civic foundation for the entire episode. Emphasize that civic virtue is not a passive quality. It requires active engagement with public records and corporate disclosures. Key talking points. Accountability breaks down when institutions stay silent. Banks, regulators, and corporate structures can all be complicit through inaction. The 53 entities introduced here are all drawn from verifiable public records. Stress that the analysis is reproducible and errors are openly disclosed. The call to action is personal. Choosing to look, to verify, and to demand transparency is where civic duty begins. Pause after the closing line. Let it land before transitioning to the data. "53. That is the number of corporate entities we have documented in connection with Jeffrey Epstein, not 53 businesses, 53 legal structures, LLCs, corporations, trusts, foundations, each designed to hold a specific asset, conduct a specific function, or shield a specific transaction from view. Together, they form a corporate architecture, a system where every layer of separation between an individual and an asset is a layer of deniability. They were identified through corporate registries, FinCEN suspicious activity reports, court documents, and the DOJ document corpus. They span 5 jurisdictions: the U.S. Virgin Islands, Delaware, Florida, New York, and Liechtenstein. This episode maps that architecture. 4 individuals appear across nearly every entity in the network. Jeffrey Epstein, President, sole stockholder, beneficiary. His name is on at least 9 entities. Darren K. Indyke, Epstein's attorney, secretary, or director of at least 12 entities, co-trustee of the Butterfly Trust, and co-executor of the estate. Richard D. Kahn, Epstein's accountant, treasurer, or director of at least 6 entities, and the other co-trustee and co-executor. Larry Visoski, Epstein's chief pilot, manager, or officer of all 4 aviation entities. These 4 names are the control layer. Every entity in the network traces back to one or more of them. Indyke and Kahn are the operational nexus. They appear on both the financial entities and the trust instruments. They signed the bank accounts. They administered the Butterfly Trust. They managed the wire transfers. And after Epstein's death, they became co-executors of the estate, the two people responsible for winding down the very architecture they helped build. The 53 entities are spread across 5 jurisdictions, and the choice of jurisdiction is not random. The U.S. Virgin Islands is the center of gravity, the most entities, the most money, and the 90% tax exemption that made it all possible. The U.S. Virgin Islands Economic Development Commission, the EDC, granted Southern Trust a 90% income tax exemption in 2013. The government later alleged the exemption was obtained through fraud. Delaware is the privacy layer. The state does not disclose officers or members in public filings. JEGI Incorporated and both Hyperion Air entities were incorporated there. Florida appears late in the story. Harlequin Dane and Birch Tree Br were both incorporated in August 2018, less than a year before arrest. New York is the operational base, the Manhattan townhouse entity, the office, the foundation. And Liechtenstein, a $20,000 wire to Walsh Surety attorneys for purchase of shares Anstalt. An Anstalt is a Liechtenstein foundation used for asset protection with no public disclosure of beneficial ownership. 5 jurisdictions, each chosen for a specific purpose: tax avoidance, privacy, late-stage creation, operations, and opacity. Source check. How do we know these entities exist? We verify them through public corporate registries. NES LLC, the entity that holds 9 East 71st Street, is active at the New York Department of State, DOS ID 2288572. NYSG LLC is listed as inactive. 9 East 71st Street Corporation, the predecessor entity, was dissolved in 2015. JEGI Incorporated, the Delaware corporation that held the Boeing 727, is confirmed at the Delaware Division of Corporations, company number 3284812, ceased April 2018. Southern Financial's legal entity identifier, its LEI, is independently verifiable. 549300 KB8Y L2X C7B 4K14. It lapsed in October 2018. Gratitude America is on ProPublica's Nonprofit Explorer, EIN 660789697, with peak assets of $10.2 million in 2015. You can verify every entity referenced in this episode. Corporate registries are public. The links are in the references. Southern Trust Company Incorporated. The Reservoir. Originally incorporated in the U.S. Virgin Islands in November 2011 under the name Financial Informatics Incorporated, it was renamed to Southern Trust Company in September 2012. Officers: Epstein as President, Indyke as Secretary, Kahn as Treasurer, the same 3 names that appear across the entire network. In 2013, Southern Trust held $198.5 million. By 2017, that had nearly doubled, $391.3 million. Let that number land. nearly $400 million in a single entity in the U.S. Virgin Islands under the control of one man and his two advisors. It operated under a U.S. Virgin Islands Economic Development Commission 90% income tax exemption granted in 2013. The stated business purpose was, and this is from the filing, DNA Database Consulting. The U.S. Virgin Islands Attorney General later found no evidence of any legitimate scientific work. None. The government alleged the exemption was obtained through fraud. Southern Trust is the crown jewel of the corporate architecture, the entity through which funds were accumulated and held. It was named in the U.S. Virgin Islands $105 million settlement with the estate in December 2022. Southern Financial LLC. The transactional arm, a subsidiary of Southern Trust incorporated in the U.S. Virgin Islands. Address 6100 Red Hook, Quarter B3, St. Thomas. This entity had a Deutsche Bank brokerage account opened August 19, 2013, the same day the Epstein relationship officially began at Deutsche Bank. That is not a coincidence. Southern Financial was the vehicle through which the banking relationship operated. It has a legal entity identifier, an LEI 549300 KB8YL 2XC 7B4K14. That LEI lapsed in October 2018, 2 months before Deutsche Bank terminated the relationship. The financial volume through this single entity, $606.9 million in inflows, $194.7 million in outflows, a net accumulation of $412.3 million. $600 million through one LLC. Southern Financial is the entity that moved money between Deutsche Bank and the rest of the network. It funded Harlequin Dane. It funded Birch Tree Br. It sent loan payments back to itself. It is the pipeline. The Butterfly Trust, the distribution mechanism. This is not a corporation. It is a trust instrument. It does not appear in any corporate registry. You cannot look it up at a state filing office. It exists only in bank records and court filings. Established in 2013, Deutsche Bank opened a checking and money market account for it on January 24, 2014. Co-trustees, Indyke and Kahn. Over the next 4 years, more than 120 wire transfers totaling $2.65 million were sent to beneficiaries. Those beneficiaries included, and this is the language from the NYDFS consent order, women with Eastern European surnames. The stated purposes were tuition, rent, hotel expenses, and immigration expenses. At least 18 wires of $10,000 or more went to individuals designated in the consent order as co-conspirators, persons who invoked the Fifth Amendment in prior proceedings. One of them allegedly recruited underage victims. More than $7 million in legal settlement payments and $6 million in legal expenses also flowed through the trust. Settlement payments and legal fees through the same trust that was sending wire transfers for immigration expenses to women with Eastern European surnames. The Butterfly Trust was closed December 17, 2019, 4 months after Epstein's death. It was named in the U.S. Virgin Islands settlement. After Epstein's death on August 10, 2019, Something happened to the Butterfly Trust. According to the U.S. Virgin Islands Attorney General, approximately $13 million was concealed and transferred out of the trust, not to its designated beneficiaries, but to 3 newly created entities. Those 3 entities named Darren Indyke, Richard Kahn, and their spouses as beneficiaries. The co-trustees of the trust, the people responsible for administering it faithfully, allegedly redirected $13 million to themselves. The trust was closed December 17, 2019, 4 months after death. We present this as an allegation by the U.S. Virgin Islands Attorney General. It is not a court finding. We have not independently verified the identities of the 3 destination entities. What we have verified is that the Butterfly Trust existed, that Indyke and Kahn were its co-trustees, and that the U.S. Virgin Islands government named it in the $105 million settlement. NES LLC. This entity holds 9 East 71st Street, the Manhattan Townhouse. Filed at the New York Department of State on August 13, 1998. DOSID 2288572. Status: active. The mansion was originally received from Leslie Wexner in 1998 through the predecessor entity 9 East 71st Street Corporation. That corporation was filed in 1989 and dissolved in 2015. In 2011, NES LLC transferred the property to Maple Incorporated, a U.S. Virgin Islands entity, for $0. Epstein signed for both sides of the transaction. In October 2013, the registered address for NES LLC was changed from the Manhattan Townhouse to 6100 Red Hook Quarter in St. Thomas. A New York entity now had a Virgin Islands address. NES LLC remains active today. You can verify that at the New York Department of State. NYSG LLC, the New York Strategy Group. Filed January 13, 2000 at the New York Department of State. Currently inactive. Address: 457 Madison Avenue, the Villard Houses. Officers include Indyke, along with Lauren Quintner, Jeffrey Shantz, Harry Beller, and Juan Alessi, Epstein's former house manager. The stated purpose was financial advisory for ultra-high net worth individuals, clients with more than $1 billion. It billed the Wexners. In Episode 6, we covered the FedEx shipping network. Of the 2,894 total shipments, 199 were billed to NYSG LLC's FedEx account, 229207504. The DOS ID for NYSG LLC remains unconfirmed. The New York Department of State web interface was inaccessible during our verification. We disclose this gap. The aviation layer. 5 entities, each created for a single purpose, hold an aircraft. JEG Incorporated, a Delaware corporation, Epstein as CEO. It held the Boeing 727, tail number N908JE, and the Gulfstream 4. JEG Incorporated ceased in April 2018. JEG LLC, a separate entity incorporated in the U.S. Virgin Islands. Despite the similar name, this is a different legal entity. Epstein as president, Visoski as manager. It held a different Gulfstream 4 under tail number N212JE. This entity was sold to Thomas Huff in June 2019, 1 month before Epstein's arrest. Huff later sued the estate, claiming the aircraft was stigmatized. Hyperion Air Incorporated and Hyperion Air LLC, both Delaware, both with Indyke and Visoski as officers. They held the Bell 430 helicopter and the Sikorsky S-76C. Plan D LLC, U.S. Virgin Islands, Visoski as manager. It held the Gulfstream G550, which was later sold in December 2020. One person appears on every aviation entity, Larry Visoski, the chief pilot who managed every airframe in the fleet. 5 entities, 5 aircraft, 1 pilot. This connects directly to Episode 8, Flight Patterns. 575 Lexington Avenue, 4th floor, New York. This is where it all converges. This is the address of HBRK Associates Incorporated, the entity controlled by Richard Kahn as sole signer. This is also the address of DKI PLLC, Darren Indyke's law firm. 1 floor, 2 entities, the attorney and the accountant. In the TD Bank Suspicious Activity Report, 2 HBRK accounts at TD Bank received $4.68 million in suspicious wires. The money came from NES LLC, Southern Trust Company, Southern Country International, and the HBRK Deutsche Bank account that was being closed. $4.68 million flowing into 1 floor. On May 7, 2019, exactly 2 months before Epstein's arrest, Kahn made a $50,000 cash withdrawal from the HBRK account. That triggered a currency transaction report. $50,000 in cash, 2 months before arrest. $20,000 went from this floor to Volch Schurte in Liechtenstein for purchase of shares Anstalt. Tuition and accommodation payments for a redacted female student went from this floor. But here is what makes this address significant beyond the dollar amounts. It appears in wire transfer records. It appears in the SAR. It appears in corporate registrations. It appears in FedEx shipping records. 4 independent evidence domains. 1 floor of 1 building. Every evidence domain in this series converges here. Let us be specific about what converges at this address. Wire transfer records. 3 Deutsche Bank accounts list their address as care of HBRK at 575 Lexington, NES LLC, DKI PLLC, and HBRK Associates. The care of notation means these entities received their mail at Indyke's office. The TD Bank SAR. The Butterfly Trust's address is listed as care of HBRK Associates, 575 Lexington Avenue, 4th floor. The total suspicious activity across all subjects in the SAR is $47.3 million. Corporate filings. DKI PLLC's registered office. 9 East 71st Street Corporation, the predecessor to NES LLC, listed its principal office here. FedEx shipments. This address appears in Dataset 10 as a shipping destination for Indyke, Bella Klein, and others. 4 independent evidence domains, 1 address. The wire records come from Deutsche Bank. The SAR comes from TD Bank. The corporate filings come from state registries. The FedEx records come from DOJ Dataset 10. No single source could produce this pattern. This is not a coincidence. This is an operational hub. 6100 Red Hook Quarter B3, St. Thomas, U.S. Virgin Islands. This is the second hub. At least 5 entities share this address. FT Real Estate, a U.S. Virgin Islands entity with a First Bank Puerto Rico account, likely related to Financial Trust Company. Southern Country International, with a Charles Schwab account holding $1.66 million. Financial Trust Company, Epstein's original money management firm, established 1996. Bella Klein, identified in the SAR as HBRK's assistant controller since November 1999, also has this as her U.S. Virgin Islands address. She has a Morgan Stanley trust account from which over $1 million was wired to Indyke's personal checking account. NES LLC, the Manhattan townhouse entity, changed its registered address to this location in October 2013. Southern Financial LLC lists this as its address. 1 address in St. Thomas, at least 7 entities. This is the island complement to the Manhattan hub at 575 Lexington. Each major property is held by a dedicated entity. NES LLC holds the Manhattan townhouse. Little St. James LLC holds the private island. LSJ Employees LLC, named in the settlement, manage the island staff. Zorro Development Corporation holds the New Mexico ranch. FT Real Estate is noteworthy. A $3 million wire from its First Bank Puerto Rico account went to Indyke's personal checking with the memo Real Estate Transaction for a property at 6030 Lilac Road in West Palm Beach. That wire flowed from a U.S. Virgin Islands entity through a Puerto Rico bank to an attorney's personal account for a Florida real estate purchase. 3 jurisdictions, 1 transaction. And Great St. James Island, purchased in January 2016 for $22.5 million. The buyer listed on the transaction was not Jeffrey Epstein. It was Sultan Ahmed bin Sulayem, a straw buyer used to conceal Epstein's identity as the actual purchaser. We will return to that in a moment. Great St. James Island. In January 2016, the island was purchased for $22.5 million. The buyer listed on the transaction was Sultan Ahmed bin Sulayem, a Dubai-based businessman and chairman of DP World, one of the largest port operators in the world, but the actual purchaser was Jeffrey Epstein. Bin Sulayem was used as a straw buyer, a named third party who appears on the transaction documents to conceal the identity of the true beneficial owner. $22.5 million for a Caribbean island, and the man who actually bought it does not appear on the purchase documents. The holding entity is Great St. Jim LLC, a U.S. Virgin Islands entity. This is beneficial ownership concealment in its most direct form, not through layered LLCs or offshore trusts, through a human being who lends their name to a transaction. This pattern, using intermediaries to obscure who actually controls an asset, is the same pattern that repeats at every level of the corporate architecture. The difference is one of technique. Sometimes the intermediary is an LLC. Sometimes it is a trust. Sometimes it is a person. December 2022. The government of the U.S. Virgin Islands settled with the Epstein estate for $105 million. The settlement named 10 entities: Gratitude America, the private foundation; J. Epstein Foundation; Southern Trust Company, the reservoir; Financial Trust Company, the original money management firm; IGYAYH St. Thomas Holdings, a marina entity; the Butterfly Trust, the distribution mechanism; LSJ Employees, the island staff entity; CDE Incorporated; Financial Informatics, which is simply the original name of Southern Trust; and a 10th entity that has not been publicly identified in available settlement summaries. These 10 entities are not our map. They are the government's map. The U.S. Virgin Islands Attorney General, a government prosecutor, looked at the corporate network and named these 10 as the entities connected to Epstein's operations. Our count of 53 is broader. It includes entities from the SAR, from Delaware filings, from aviation registrations, and from the DOJ corpus that the government settlement did not name. But these 10 are the confirmed core. Gratitude America Limited, a 501c3 private grant-making foundation, incorporated in the U.S. Virgin Islands in September 2012. EIN 6607899697. You can look it up on ProPublica's Nonprofit Explorer right now. Epstein was president from 2012 to 2015. Kahn took over as president after that. Indyke served as vice president and treasurer. Erica Kellerhals, a U.S. Virgin Islands tax attorney who appears across multiple entities, was secretary and treasurer. In 2015, peak assets hit $10.2 million. $10 million of that came from a single donation by BV70 LLC, an entity associated with Leon Black, the former CEO of Apollo Global Management. In January 2016, Epstein's accountant requested a Deutsche Bank brokerage account for Gratitude America. The ARC, Deutsche Bank's Reputational Risk Committee, ordered external due diligence. Epstein resigned from Gratitude America. The request was withdrawn. No due diligence report was ever completed. By fiscal year 2022, $8.2 million in assets, zero revenue. A foundation that receives nothing and grants nothing, but still holds $8 million. These are the ghost entities. They exist in exactly one document, the TD Bank Suspicious Activity Report, BSA 31001550700501, filed October 1st, 2019. Harlequin Dane LLC, incorporated in Florida on August 14th, 2018. Indyke as sole signer. 7 wires totaling $7.75 million, all funded by Southern Financial LLC. The debits include Seaford Avenue Capital, Signature Title Group, JR Watersports, and JetSmarter. Birch Tree Br LLC, same incorporation date, same day, same state. Also Indyke as sole member. $300,000, 2 wires. Debits include payments to Roadruck Investigations, a Miami private investigator. FT Real Estate, $3 million wired to Indyke's personal checking for a real estate purchase in West Palm Beach. Avaloop, a New Hampshire aviation entity. JSC Interiors, $100,000 to DKI PLLC. Representation Trust, $2 million in legal fees. Southern Country International, $1.66 million from a Charles Schwab account. Without this SAR, we would not know these entities existed. They do not appear in corporate registries we have been able to search. They do not appear in the DOJ corpus. They are known from a single document. We flag that limitation explicitly. Here is the full network. 53 entities, 4 officers, 2 hubs. Every node on this graph is an entity we have documented from corporate registries, the SAR, court filings, or the DOJ corpus. The nodes are sized by financial volume where known. Southern Trust and Southern Financial are the largest. The Butterfly Trust sits between them. The edges represent relationships, ownership, officer connections, and wire flows. You can see the 2 hubs, the Manhattan cluster around HBRK and the U.S. Virgin Islands cluster around Red Hook. The entities with dashed outlines are the SAR-only entities, Harlequin Dane, Birch Tree Br, and the others known from a single source. 4 officer nodes connect the clusters, Epstein, Indyke, Kahn, and Visoski. Remove Indyke from this graph and the network fragments. He is the connective tissue, the only individual who appears in the financial entities, the aviation entities, the trust, and both hubs. This is the corporate architecture. Each entity serves a function. Together, they form a system. The pattern is always the same. An individual at the top, a trust or holding company at the second layer, an LLC at the third layer, and an asset at the bottom, a bank account, an aircraft, a piece of real estate. Each layer adds 1 degree of separation between the person who controls the asset and the asset itself. Epstein to Southern Trust to Southern Financial to a Deutsche Bank brokerage account holding $606 million. Epstein to Jeggy Incorporated to the Boeing 727. Sultan bin Sulayem to Great St. Jim LLC to Great St. James Island. The technique is not novel. Beneficial ownership layering is a standard practice in asset protection, estate planning, and, when used to evade regulatory oversight, financial crime. What is notable here is the scale, 53 entities to serve 1 individual, and the consistency. The same 4 officers appear at every level, in every jurisdiction, across every asset class. Pipeline stage. This episode draws on 3 stages of the processing pipeline. Script 5, Co-occurrence graph construction. This is where we build the network of entity relationships. Every time 2 entities appear in the same document, they form a relationship pair, 29.5 million unique pairs. Script 19, Entity resolution using Splink, a probabilistic record linkage system. This is where we determine whether Southern Trust Company and Southern Trust Co. Incorporated are the same entity. 519,000 clusters resolved. Script 21, Network topology using Leiden community detection. This finds communities of entities that cluster together, groups that co-occur more often with each other than with the rest of the network. 125,620 communities identified. The 53 entities in this episode were identified through manual research, corporate registries, the SAR, court filings. But the pipeline's entity resolution and community detection validate the structure computationally. When Leiden finds that Southern Trust, Southern Financial, and the Butterfly Trust cluster together, that is independent confirmation of the ownership chain. Why build a corporate architecture at all? There are three primary functions. First, asset protection. When assets are held by an LLC, they cannot be directly seized from the individual in a personal lawsuit. NES LLC holds the Manhattan townhouse, not Jeffrey Epstein. To reach that asset, you have to pierce the corporate veil or name the LLC in litigation. Second, liability isolation. Each entity's liabilities are separate. If the aviation entity faces the claim, the real estate entities are unaffected. This is why each aircraft is held by a different entity. Jeggy Incorporated for the 727, Hyperion Air for the helicopter, Plan D for the G550. A crash claim against one airframe does not reach the others. Third, ownership concealment. In Delaware, officer and member names are not disclosed in public filings. In the U.S. Virgin Islands, registered agents provide an address layer. And when a straw buyer is used, as with Great St. James, the beneficial owner's name never appears at all. These functions are individually legal. In combination, at this scale, with these officers, they form a system designed to separate Jeffrey Epstein from the assets he controlled. Transparent science. 53 is the number of entities we have documented through manual research, corporate registries, the SAR, court filings, and the DOJ corpus. But how many entities are we missing? The Chow 1 species richness estimator provides a statistical lower bound. Our named entity recognition pipeline extracted 821,633 unique entities from the corpus. Of those, 197,945 are singletons, entities that appear only once. 41,816 are doubletons, appearing exactly twice. The Chow 1 formula uses the ratio of singletons to doubletons to estimate the total population. S estimated equals S observed plus F1 squared over 2 times F2. The result? An estimated 1,290,000 entities. The corpus is approximately 63.7% complete. An estimated 468,000 entities have not yet been surfaced. For organizations specifically, the category that includes corporate entities, 485,000 observed, 759,000 estimated, 63.9% complete. 53 entities documented manually, 485,000 detected computationally, 759,000 estimated statistically. Each scale tells us something different. The manual count tells us what we can prove. The computational count tells us what the corpus contains. The statistical estimate tells us what the corpus is missing. When an entity appears in multiple independent evidence domains, that is, cross-domain presence. 9 entities from this episode's network appear in 2 or more evidence domains. Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell appear in 3: wire transfers, FedEx shipments, and bank records. That is expected. They are the primary subjects. More interesting are the entities that cross domains in ways that connect separate episodes. Southern Financial LLC, the pipeline entity from this episode, also appears as a wire source in the SAR. Bella Klein, identified in the SAR as HBRK's assistant controller, also appears in the FedEx shipping records as a sender and recipient. Jigi Incorporated, the aviation entity, appears in FedEx records because aircraft parts were shipped to its attention. NYSG LLC appears in both FedEx records and corporate filings. All 9 are classified as leads, not findings. The confidence-adjusted threshold for a finding is 0.75. None of these cross-domain presences on their own meet that threshold. They are suggestive, not conclusive. We present them as leads and invite further investigation. Paralog. 6 limitations to disclose. First, 53 is a lower bound. We cannot count entities that are sealed, offshore in opaque jurisdictions, or hidden in the 42% of documents that have not yet been released. The true count is higher. Second, several entities in this episode are known from the single source, the TD Bank SAR. We have not independently verified Harlequin Dane, Birch Tree Br, or the other SAR-only entities through public corporate registries. Third, the U.S. Virgin Islands Corporate Registry does not offer the same online accessibility as New York or Delaware. Some U.S. Virgin Islands entities cannot be verified through public web portals. Fourth, the DOS ID for NYSG LLC remains unconfirmed. We attempted to verify it through the New York Department of State, but the web interface was inaccessible during our research window. Fifth, the $13 million post-death transfer is an allegation by the U.S. Virgin Islands Attorney General. It is not a court finding. We present it as an allegation. Sixth, our entity count focuses on U.S. jurisdictions. Entities in Liechtenstein, the United Kingdom, and Nova Scotia are documented but not fully researched. International entities are undercounted. What you can do. Corporate registries are public. Every entity referenced in this episode can be independently verified. The New York Department of State, search for NES LLC or NYSG LLC. The Delaware Division of Corporations, search for JEGE Incorporated, company number 3284812. Open Corporates, a global corporate registry aggregator where you can search any entity name. The Legal Entity Identifier System. Look up Southern Financial's LEI and see its registration. ProPublica's Nonprofit Explorer. Enter Gratitude America's EIN and see its tax filings. The FAA Aircraft Registry. Search any tail number from this episode. All the links are on screen and in the references document. Search, verify. Do not take our word for it. The foundation of corporate accountability is public access to corporate records. If you believe corporate registries should be more transparent, that beneficial owners should be disclosed, that shell companies should be harder to create anonymously, that is a policy position worth holding. But start with the records that are already public. 53 entities, 5 jurisdictions, 4 officers, 1 floor of 1 building where every financial flow converges. The corporate architecture is not complex because it needs to be. It is complex because complexity is the product. Each layer of separation between an individual and an asset is a layer of deniability. The next episode follows the communications that moved through this network. 863,000 emails extracted from DOJ datasets 9 and 11. Leslie Groff, Epstein's scheduler, arranging appointments after the 2008 conviction. Amex Centurion bookings to Moscow. An email corpus that extends to 2017, years after the plea deal was supposed to have ended it. Episode 10, 863,000 emails. The Post-Conviction Network.